We've got a really great webinar for you guys today. We have two brilliant technologists and community managers who are joining me today. Jacob Coverstone, Managing Director at Neurovations, and Tom Andrews, VP of Technology and Operations at Pavilion. You guys are in for a real treat. I have had some of the most in-depth and engaging conversations with them both in preparing for this webinar today. And trust me, you're going to have a really great session. Definitely worth an hour of your time. These folks have built really successful communities, and they're not just going to share community theory. They will be giving you the honest, no fluff, real world insights on both the struggles and benefits that come with using community management platforms and kind of custom building the community to the parameters that you guys need them to be. So thank you both for being with us today. And for our audience, please be aware that during today's session, you can ask questions using the Q&A box located on the bottom of your screen. We're going to do our best to answer them live, but we'll also be answering some at the end. We'd also love to read more about your communities, goals, challenges. So hit us up via the chat with where you're at, what community you're managing, and feel free to kind of get to know each other in the process. So now with all of the intros out of the way, we can hop right into our discussion for the day. We've also actually, real quick, we've got attendees from more than 10 countries on today's webinar. Very exciting for us. Job roles that are here include community manager, VP of operations, chief of staff, senior systems analyst, and marketing growth manager. So we're excited. We've got a lot of technical folks on the call today. We're going to talk a lot about technology integrations, kind of the how the sausage is made a bit today in terms of building your communities. So thank you guys again. Thanks, Jacob and Tom, for joining me today. I'm really excited.
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks, Allie.
So to start off, both of your communities represent really kind of diverse audiences, different community types. So let's kind of dive into the different types of communities. Jacob, I'll have you get started giving us a little bit of background.
Thanks, Allie. Yeah, this has been actually really fun talking just with Allie and with Tom, because there is a lot that, I mean, we face similar challenges, but from very different approaches and even levels of establishment within our communities. So our group is working essentially for the National Institutes of Health on a grant-funded program here in the United States to try to get researchers from different disciplines to kind of come together, collaborate, be aware of where those interdisciplinary intersections are, and hopefully achieve new heights in science for the public good. So our big challenge was trying to take kind of a scattered network that existed, but not in any integrated sense, and try to help create one platform and one generalizable community that can bring everybody together. And so Hivebrite's been a good tool for us in pursuing this mission.
Thanks so much, Jacob. And Tom, over to you about Pavilion.
Yes, so we're quite different. We are the world's #1 private community for GTM leaders. So we're for profit, we're a company built on a membership. Think of us like LinkedIn, but a little bit more private, invite only, and in my opinion, a bit cooler. But obviously I am biased. So we have GTM leaders from across marketing, RevOps, sales, customer success, even a little bit of operations thrown in, coming together to learn about modern best practices. We recently completed a course on AI and automation for GTM leaders, had 750 people joining. It just shows you the appetite out there for even people in the world of GTM to learn more and more about technology. So very excited to be here today, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. So we'll hop right in. We're here to talk about today, build versus buy. Many professional communities face the decision between building their own platform for their community management, or purchasing a pre-existing community management platform. So you guys were both kind of somewhat recently in the same shoes, considering these decisions. What factors influenced your decision-making process when you were looking at building or buying a community management platform? And we'll start with you, Tom. Any kind of criteria you took into consideration to make that decision?
Awesome. So we actually had quite a bit of a journey getting here. So we spent the last kind of 2 years before we came to Hivebrite trying to build ourselves and really struggling to kind of stay up to date on all the features that we would need for a community and to really understand what is community. we were very good at what we did as Pavilion, and we understood what our members wanted, but we didn't really know about other feature sets that were out there. And it got really difficult to kind of balance the speed of innovation alongside the pace we wanted to move at as a business. For us to grow, we had to launch some kind of centralized member hub that really brought people together and made them feel like there really was a living and breathing community. Before it, we were essentially 8 different tools. We'd give everyone different logins. They might use different email addresses, which caused me all sorts of nightmares trying to centralize all our data. So we came to the decision to move away from trying to build something ourselves and start trying to look for Lego bricks. So that's what we really felt like we found with Hivebrite was it was something we didn't build ourselves, but we could build it into what we wanted. And over the last kind of 15 months, I think, since we've been with you, it has really felt like we're able to build exactly what we want, but someone else has put in the sparks of genius to create the blocks we needed in order to be able to succeed in building a great community for all of our members.
Awesome. Because building all of that yourself is essentially like having two completely separate companies, one building a SaaS product and then one kind of managing your community, your kind of bread and butter of everything.
Exactly. And now we've got all of the pre-built modules, everything we need. It all fits perfectly together without any need to integrate between the different little parts of it. And we can just build it into what Pavilion should be as a community instead of trying to build the community. It's turning it into what we need it to be and making it work for all of our members.
Absolutely. Awesome. And then Jacob, what did your kind of journey look like when kind of assessing what the next steps were to take for you?
You know, there's things that are similar to what Tom has laid out because I think we face a lot of the same problems and challenges just in this space, regardless. I guess probably every Hivebrite, client or prospect does. We scoped a lot of different options and tried to really assess things before our initial funding. And you know, for the speed of deployment that we knew we wanted to actually be able to implement things, we had a very aggressive timeline. And so trying to sit down and build all of that ourselves while also trying to plan an in-person conference, while trying to educate the members who are within the community, it would have split focus way too much, essentially. What we needed, and this is to Tom's point about Lego bricks, is to be able to start assembling, the modules that already existed out there. So we looked at even competitors of Hivebrite and really tried to say, what are those core elements? What are the bricks we know that we need? And then say, all right, let's find someone who's doing a real good job making the fabs for these bricks. So we don't have to worry about the maintenance and the upkeep of all of that. We can focus on the instructional design, trying to onboard and integrate these different multidisciplinary members of our community, and then use this as a tool to communicate with and to empower them. Because I don't think a lot of people understand platformization in general and what it means to give tools to that next degree of a community. Tom, you're shaking your head in a, yeah, that's absolutely true way. So, I
Yeah,
mean, that
no,
was, why we went, with Hivebrite to begin with. It really was just for us about speed and for flexibility combined. And that's a hard tightrope to walk.
we'll get into it a little bit later, but some of kind of the questions that we see when people are like considering the two is like, but can I achieve what I need to achieve with a pre-existing solution? And we've talked a lot about kind of customization, which kind of dovetails a little bit into the next question, which is how has choosing a platform that's customizable affected the way you look at resources and budget? Has it been worth the investment? Have you been able to kind of get out of it what you're looking for? And Jacob, we'll kind of start with you there.
I mean, yes, we've been able to get out of it what we've been looking for. This is something that I know Tom and I have talked about in kind of these pre-call planning sessions of it's hard to track the indirect cost of, the staff time and what it takes to sort of do the modifications, do the testing, do the maintenance, but you would have just been building it otherwise. And so there's no guarantee necessarily in terms of some of that cost savings. What you're getting is expertise. I mean, it's the same reason that we start with these base tools to begin with. Hivebrite gets to solve these problems at scale for a variety of clients to make sure that, hey, these are the right tools. But I think has been clever enough to realize that you're not going to make the perfect thing for everybody. And so we've spent a lot of our time basically breaking Hivebrite apart and trying to say, okay, they meant for this button to work this way, or for this field to do this thing, but we need something that works kind of like that, and we don't actually need what they envisioned. So we're going to co-opt that feature now. We're going to use it for something else. And just the ability to sort of break it apart in that way and rebuild it to what we needed. Again, it's already giving us a springboard. We don't have to,
Yeah.
and even to Tom's point earlier about coming up with ideas that we wouldn't have had necessarily, that alone is invaluable. Yeah.
Yeah. And Tom, over to you. But yeah, as we were kind of chatting about a bunch of these different things, we do have the benefit, we've got customers in a bunch of different industries, and seeing the way that people use the platform in such different ways. These case studies, these webinars, like, help other folks kind of understand, oh yeah, I didn't think about using projects in that way, and maybe I can apply it to this different use case. But one thing we wanted to kind of really clearly get across during the conversation was that um, the customization of the platform, using integrations to really kind of start at a foundation from a platform, but then build it and customize it to exactly or close to exactly like what you need for your, no two communities are the same. So that being said, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so we actually had a team of 11 working on the previous kind of iteration back when we were trying to build it ourselves. And so obviously it was very sad to part ways with them, but it did free up a lot of efficiency for the organization. And Jacob's totally right. Like, it's very hard to track the amount of Tom time that went into building out Hivebrite to work the way we wanted. But that's kind of my job. And so it doesn't feel like I'm stepping outside of my day to day. I'm just making sure it's customized for our members and it does everything we need. So we've heavily extended Hivebrite into all our other systems, built a bidirectional sync with Salesforce. We run a lot of machine learning models in there to figure out engagement. And to one of the questions I saw coming in the chat, like, it can always be a challenge to keep members participating and keep them really engaged. Figuring out like what people want to do next can be super difficult, especially when those are people who are very busy naturally. So a lot of our members are CROs, CMOs, VPs of sales, VPs of marketing, and those are people who don't have a ton of time to invest in community. When they come to Pavilion, they want value, and we want to be able to just serve that straight up. So by having the extensibility, which is all built through make.com, which is relatively inexpensive, to one of the other questions, the data flows from Hivebrite into Salesforce seamlessly. We can see in our own context how different members who are paying different amounts of money are browsing different types of content, and kind of figure out from all of that, what is the next big thing? What are people really engaging with? What are people from North America looking at? What are people from London looking at? Should we be doing more of X, Y, and Z in a different time zone? Is there something we can do with our content to repurpose it, change it up, move it around? And then for the people who are disengaging, how can we use what's coming up next and the content we've got loaded into Hivebrite, or maybe some features they've not engaged with before, maybe our job board or our sponsor marketplace, which are customizations that we've kind of reconfigured. I liked Jacob's way of talking about it, that we've broken and made work in a different way. And how can we use that to get people back into the platform and back to engaging? We are very happy if someone comes in a little and often. They like pop into the community, ask a question, get an answer, and move on. Or if they're engaging through courses and kind of like the bigger rock, higher time commitments. But we know that we need to have done a certain amount of work to convince them that spending 6 to 9 hours on one of our courses is a super valuable investment of their time, when they could be doing something else with that. So through the extensibility, which arguably does take up some of my time to maintain, but it's still less time than when we had a team of 11 building, designing, and maintaining all of this. We're able to understand not just like what the community is doing, but also get some insights into what they might want next, which is super invaluable to us. And I really don't believe that we ever could have designed that feature set ourselves, because we would have been solely focused on Pavilion's needs. We wouldn't have been thinking like, what does a healthy community look like, and what are features that a community needs? So we were able to just roll some things out, just pretty much the way Hivebrite designed them, and then customize them over time. And those were things we'd never even imagined we would need, but instantly created more value for our members. And the job board is a really great example of that. We had always aspired to have a job board. We explored like all sorts of ways of doing it with like Airtables and Google Sheets, and all of them were a bit crap. And then we just launched it all on Hivebrite, and now people absolutely love it. Great question from Jerry. I'll answer really quickly. So it was a team of 11 engineers and product people like trying to build it out. I have 4 people in my team, 5 actually. I've got a developer, 2 system administrators, and then 2 people who work on our course design and operation. So it's still a reasonably big team, but we work across every technology, every course at Pavilion, not just Hivebrite. I would estimate in total, it's probably about 10 to 15% of my team's time that is dedicated to Hivebrite outside of bugs, where we would all jump in it and try and fix it. But those only happen kind of like intermittently. In this year so far, we've only had 2 kind of bugs where we've all needed to jump on it. And none of those were purely because of Hivebrite. It was normally because of some wild extension I had built through the API that had gone a bit crazy.
No, thank you, Tom. And one thing I just wanted to touch on that you've mentioned before is both you and Jacob have a lot of this technological expertise. So you were able to kind of envision something that you were looking for, and able to kind of connect that through an API, through kind of custom building. For folks who don't have that on their team, who are looking for it, what would you recommend? We've got professional services, you've got consultants, but there are kind of like alternatives essentially where, you know, Hivebrite provides X, Y, and Z. We provide a lot of customization through APIs, but can you talk a little bit maybe about both of your kind of technical backgrounds and how you've gotten to the place where you knew you needed to get to point Z, but you also understood the steps that you wanted to take to customize in the highly efficient way that you were able to do it?
Sure. Do you want me to jump in first? Because I've just put this in the chat basically. So
Okay.
we do everything on Salesforce. I would describe myself as an enterprise technologist. My background is in Salesforce. I've actually got Astro on my desk for anyone who knows their mascot. So for me, you know, if you're looking to build out this skill set, it might already exist. If you've got people working on CRMs, if you've got people who are system administrators, a great system administrator can work across pretty much every tool, and they are familiar with the way these things are configured. So I've got 2 Salesforce administrators on my team. We didn't do any training on how to use Hivebrite. We just said, this is Hivebrite. Let's go through the implementation together. We did the implementation that Hivebrite provides. We absolutely loved it. It gave us all the skills we need to completely self-serve everything now going forwards. And sometimes we'll find a feature that like we've never used before, but it's just that system admin mindset works super well as a transferable skill. So I'm a technologist, completely transparent about that. Not everyone can build up an API integration, but that's the kind of thing you can get freelance help with. If you've already got any kind of system administrator, I think they've got transferable skills and they'd be super good at adminning, building, and really thinking about Hivebrite as a technological platform, not just a specific use case tool. And that's an important logical leap to really unlock your mind and be like, let me try doing some really cool stuff that Jacob and I have played with and really loved.
Yeah, super helpful.
I want to touch a little bit on things that Melissa and Patrick in the Q&A have touched on. And so Tom's, I think, speaking eloquently about delivering the service once you know what it is. But I think we've got a couple of questions about how do you know what services to deliver in part. And so this is where, you know, this is one of the most challenging, I think, overall arcs to begin with. And we were trying to bring together a bunch of different communities, but my background is a lot in accreditation systems, instructional design, in association management, and things of that nature. And so we had a good intuitive sense just by working within the community for years ahead of time of what some of those pain points are and what some of them are likely to be. So the real question of how do you get people onto your platform to engage, or how do you incentivize, is really what problems are you solving for them? You know, if you're just saying, hey, we're here, come on and hang out, that's not necessarily making their lives easier. That's asking them to make your life easier. And that's not going to build the kind of traction you're probably going to want to see. So this is why I mentioned before things like platformization, and it's what tools are you providing to them as the end user. So, Tom mentioned the job board, for example. Not only do we use the job board, we have a bunch of different tailored, it's our opportunities module, and there's grant funding there, there's volunteer opportunities, there's, any number of different segments that have been tuned and calibrated to the needs of the community. And then we provide that absolutely free of charge to everybody who's in it. Now, it's a problem with platforms where it's like the first fax machine was absolutely pointless because who are you going to fax, right? But the value of a network increases to the square of the number of nodes in that network. And so the more people that you actually get into your platform, it's no longer them helping you, it's now finally you helping them. Once you are a larger market for them to be able to leverage and achieve what their goals are going to be, you're going to see a lot more traction and trying to make that use case to them. Doesn't really matter where you get the foothold. The fact is, activity breeds more activity, and it inspires more use case. So once you can say, well, we have a member base now of, in our case, it's 4,600. I think, Tom, you're over 6,000 or so within your community. But the ability to say, hey, if you're looking for somebody to join your team, join your lab, this is your community, here's a free job board. That one little thing alone, allows them to tap in at a level of relevance that even LinkedIn doesn't quite manage. We're using the projects module to also convey a lot of information, in our case, mostly for preclinical and translational researchers that can say, well, here's a project that I'm on, and here are the details. And no one on LinkedIn is going to understand or care about this, but everybody in this network is going to be fascinated, even if it's at an administrative level of, oh, you did the budgets for that group? It's instant social proof, but the ability to network all of those nodes through what we've done with Hivebrite, I think allows for the greater transparency and really starts to add value to the individuals, because no one is going to comment on something for your sake. I mean, not at least consistently. You can beg people to make content. That'll work a couple of times. But if you want to inspire them to do it, what's in it for them? And are you then building the tools and tuning your community to their needs?
Yeah, we hear a lot about when we're talking about kind of measuring engagement, measuring what metrics are important in your community. One of our community managers always says to me, like, engagement for engagement's sake is not helpful. Like, you want to kind of identify the elements within your community that are beneficial and useful to your end users, and then kind of back into what you're measuring from there. And I think you guys have both spoken to that. It sounds like the job board is a big hit. I remember hearing early on in Hivebrite, one of our customers was like, well, we don't really have jobs, but we have a ton of volunteer opportunities. So we've kind of like flipped the scripts and we're using it specifically for that. And that always stuck with me with like, yes, we have built a module in a very specific way. And as is the way with technology, with different communities, people have very different perspectives and different needs. And that's where the customization and flexibility comes in. You've got these building blocks, these Legos, but you might not, Jacob, your community might not use one in the same way that Tom's does. So that's why we like doing these webinars, bringing people together and kind of sharing some of these different use cases here. So we've got a lot of great engagement questions. One thing I wanted to bring up for both of you was a question by Jerry, which is, what is the optimum skill set for the primary person responsible for implementing Hivebrite? And I was just say, maybe from your experience, what are some things that you were like, oh, I'm glad I had this skill and was able to kind of like lock into this, or if you don't have this, maybe it might be more of a challenge. And I like the idea of bringing people from your systems team in. Like, if you're implementing Hivebrite, you have an IT department, you have a team, they're not included in the process, loop them in to kind of better engagement.
Tom, you want to go first? I just rambled for a while.
No worries. I think like the best team to work on it is where the product is greater than their parts, like greater than the sum of the parts even. So we had our creative director super involved. He absolutely loved it. Unleashing our brand onto Hivebrite has like been beautiful. The outcome is incredible. So that really helped. We pride ourselves on our brand, our imagery. We do a very big event every year with about 800 people who come, and brand is center to kind of the way we try to grow. Pavilion should mean something to people when they think of our brand. Beyond the input of that team, though, everyone involved was pretty cross-functional. We had member experience people, customer success people, my team in operations, learning operations, and it really pulling it all together. It took someone who was just an awesome project manager. So I am very lucky to have an incredible woman in my team who is a brilliant project manager. She's also a brilliant, operationally minded Swiss Army knife. And so she was able to plan out all our launch activities, work really closely with Hivebrite to make sure it was realistic. At first, arguably, it wasn't realistic, but we proved we were committed to put the time in to make our launch plan realistic because we launched Hivebrite in 4 weeks. And so we were very, very hot on, okay, like what can you give us so we've got skills and tools to do things better, but what do we need to plan? And so we had about 180 rows in a Google Sheet built out with every single task that needed to be done, every person that was going to do it, what the deadline was, and we arbitered that with kind of impunity. We had a thermometer, and as it went up, we were like closer to completing everything. And it actually became a really good rallying point for the entire company, even people not involved. So for leading the implementation of Hivebrite, either a cross-disciplinary project manager, someone with a background in program direction, many product managers are very good at project management as well, or someone from an operations team where they've got that mindset and also can run a project end to end. The rest of the skills can come from within your company, from within Hivebrite, or from something as easy as like Upwork or advisors from different places. But what matters is you've got that path to your vision, and you don't have to have it perfect on day one. You just have to have it ready. And so we were pretty clear with ourselves, like these are the modules that are required by Pavilion for us to be happy. And that's what we went live with. And then we gave ourselves another 3 months to learn from feedback, work really closely with our champions, really closely with kind of long-standing members even to get feedback, iterate, improve as we went. Hivebrite was instantly such an improvement on this previous experience where there were 8 different logins. Didn't matter if it wasn't perfect on day one. So we just kind of consistently managed it like any big project or implementation. And I think it went extremely well. We launched to about 6,000 members within 4 weeks, and then another 4,000 members another 2 weeks later, and had 70% activation rate within about 3 months. So we were super proud of the launch, and I think it just was a testament to the level of organization we brought to it. I mean, I think that's true of any project. If you can organize a project, you can probably crush a project, but it does require that kind of organizational skill set.
Allie, when you ask, what is the ideal skill set for the leader, through a weird turn of events, I actually ended up with an employee manual from Valve Software. They make the Steam platform and coded the video game Half-Life, if anybody knows. But in their employee handbook, they talk a lot about the desire for what they call T-shaped people or generalizing specialists. And so you need somebody who not only has a deep domain of knowledge where you can represent that area on a team like this, but also the ability to listen to other people and translate what their needs are into this. Because as Tom mentioned, there's, design is involved, finance gets involved. You need the ability to listen and respond to the community. And there is this, this phased deployment that I think went well, both for Tom and for us, where, within 6 weeks, we were already in kind of a very closed beta for it. Within 3 months, we had opened up dramatically, but it took another month, even beyond that, for us to get the events module working and functional and integrated. And we had people for our first meeting, which was then just a few months away, saying, "Oh, I would have liked to register earlier." I'm like, we didn't have the ability to take registration earlier, But just the way that rolled out, was a rapid series of changes and feedback cycles and meeting with the community and trying to beta test things and respond quickly and saying, "Oh, we thought this would be understandable. It's not. Right. We need to make this alteration. We need to." The number of times we have changed our navigation menu and the headers and the way that we have phrased things, all just because it doesn't matter if we think we can use it.
Right.
We made that.
If it's not
Of course, we know
clear
how it
to,
works, right?
yeah.
But if someone's
It's like
looking at
web
it and
design
going,
101.
right, but it's one thing to say obstinately, we have the feature, but if no one can find it, do you really have it? And are they going to be curious enough to just spend a bunch of time poking around in hopes that you do this thing that they wish you could do? Probably not. So how do you announce here are those features and how do you explain that to community and how do you then go back and refine what your actual offering is? And the ability to do that itself, to engage in that kind of iterative improvement cycle, I think is critical to this kind of deployment. Tom, it looks like you're itching to add in there.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you were saying. I think especially the point on like what things are called. Like it sounds so simple, but language is just so powerful. I have this like mantra because I've my career has previously been in RevOps that 90% of the problems within a company are rooted in communication, and most of those come from language differences. If
Right.
marketing calls a number something different to finance, that's where most siloing comes from. But anyway, I could talk for hours on this, but it's very important within the community itself that what something is called is what the community understands it as. And if you're launching something new, you actually need to over-index on the amount you're communicating what it is, what it means, and what the value of it is, because people aren't always super open to exploring. And even if it's in the first level of your navigation, doesn't mean people are going to click on it. And for your brand new members, like they're going to see it and think it was always there. So they might then go and explore. And you can end up with a really interesting distribution where new members are using new features more than older members because you've never thought about reselling or in-selling the value of those new things into the old guard. So all of our newer offerings, we noticed, thanks to the bidirectional sync of Hivebrite data into Salesforce, we're seeing much higher usage by new members than older members. And
Mhm.
we wondered, did we create this value from a biased data set? Did we misunderstand what our longest standing members needed? But we didn't. Actually, we just never made the effort to really communicate why something new was valuable to people who already thought Pavilion was valuable. And so then it was like, hey, we've added even more value. And then people were really engaged with it. And that was awesome to see. But it's super important that you understand what people are looking for and what they think of it as. And you don't just name it something crazy. We have had a habit for a while of calling things very strange, like names. Like we would make them up. We had like a program which anyone else would have called an ambassador program, and we called it a harbinger program. And everyone was like, what is that? And we were like, we don't know. So we're in a much better place now. We're much better at naming things. People understand it. We call a spade, as my dad would say. And I think it's made the community also almost develop like its own
Mhm.
language. Like members use our
Yeah.
terminology to each other, and it's almost like a secret way of like mentioning you're in Pavilion. No one does it consciously, but people will use our terms for things. And someone else will be like, are you a Pavilion member? Did you do the course on revenue architecture? Yes. And then like that's where they got that linguistic palette from. So it's just a really interesting way of seeing like community come to life just through language.
I think you're absolutely right, though, about the need to reinform as additional value is added. Because the people who join or come to that community later say, oh, this must have always been here. They don't know you deployed it yesterday. It's just the thing they've loved since day one. It was there on day one when they got there. Whereas those people who were members for 20 years or however long said, well, that wasn't important when I got there and I never thought to look for it. But now that you mention it, that's either good not only for me or for somebody on my team. And that's how you can kind of help to build that community growth. But it doesn't hurt to go back and say, this is something you may not have even realized you're able to do now. One of the ways that I think has been real helpful for us we use a lot of the projects module. So we've got about 2,000 already in there. We're working on a data import for another 4,000 plus that are actually going to be brought in, and the ability to cross-link these collaborations and say, not only is this the owner of that project, but here's 13 other people who collaborated on it, is something that no other platform that at least this user base is a member of has to offer. But when there were only 400 people that we had in our community, you couldn't really add your collaborators. You'd have to try to invite them, hope that they came, come back,
Mm.
add them in later. But now find about 70% of the people that they want to add are already now part of our network. And that makes it a lot easier to take advantage of what before was a good idea, but a difficult to utilize module because the community itself wasn't there to make it easier to just, oh, this person's with me on this project and they're already here. We still have a ways to go on that, but in the last 2 years, it's become so much easier and of so much more value to be able to codify those relationships and to convey that through all of the various cross linkages. It's
Yeah.
great for users that shows up on their profile, that it shows up in a centralized location, that through search terminology, you can find what that project is and see that these people are attached to it. We absolutely love that feature and probably never would have thought through it as much as Hivebrite did originally, or we just broke it in useful ways too.
And no, that's a good point, Jacob, too. I think there's something really important to consider for everyone who's listening. There are different kind of types of community in terms of community maturity. There are communities who don't exist on any type of platform, and Hivebrite or another
Mhm.
community management platform is the first that they're using to kind of build the community. Your community, your engagements, your expectations are going to look a lot different than what Jacob and Tom are talking about, which are more established, mature communities who have either migrated over to Hivebrite from another community management platform or from kind of a really strong in-person non-digital base or from a bunch
Mhm.
of point solutions that were being cobbled together to create a community experience. And so when you think about all of the different modules that you're using or the engagement or the strategy, it's going to look very different from a community that's just getting started, that's kind of building its legs and building its foundation there. So that's kind of very eye-opening. Don't feel like if you're not doing all of these different things that it's not going to come. It's just there are kind of steps to kind of get to a really thriving, active, engaged community, and it takes a lot of kind of building and strategy to get there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see here. A lot of these questions that we had kind of pre-planned really kind of came through the chat, which was phenomenal. No, we were going to talk a little bit, which I think we touched on already, about the benefits of doing a phased approach to launching your community, not throwing all of the different modules and features at the same time. Um, I think we touched on most of that already. One of the, let's see here. Oh, let's touch here on what was your take on balancing quick setup versus making things exactly how you wanted them. So for both of you, I know we talked about kind of launching the community with a limited set and kind of phasing that
Mhm.
out over a few months. Do you feel like your community is a living, breathing thing where you keep adding things to kind of get to this ideal state? Or how long do you feel like until you got to a point where you were like, we've gotten 99% of what we were looking for kind of launching in the community? Just your perspective.
It's interesting because quick deployment was one of our key needs. We really did want to be able to roll out aggressively and to kind of get ahead of things as far as we saw it because we felt like we were already behind. But I don't know that we'll ever feel like we've got everything there. I mean,
Yeah.
the more that the community itself matures, the more that there are additional requests of if only we could ABC, right? And so now it becomes well, let's try to work on that or figure out a way to do that or see if there's some existing piece that allows us to implement that. I think it always has to be a living, growing, responsive, um,
Yeah.
you know, relationship with the community itself, because otherwise, as it matures, it will move on if you don't constantly try to understand what needs you're not meeting, not just which needs you are. If there is something that emerges for whatever reason that your community says this is now what we value, that's why they jump ship. And so you need to be tuned in and constantly saying, well, is there a way that we can deliver on that and not say that's not what we do?
Mm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've worked in a lot of companies for a while in my career. My average tenure was 8 months. Been at Pavilion a lot longer. So I've worked in a lot of scale up, startups, SaaS businesses, technology businesses, and what defines the community industry is that it is a living, breathing, amorphous, ever-changing thing that you're building,
Yeah.
and it's your ability to understand and react to that that is how you build a relationship with your members. It's it's being able to see like times of change coming or like hard times coming, especially for us. We boomed in COVID. Everyone was suddenly online. We were a virtual community. We brought a lot of people together. Post COVID, we relaunched all our geographical chapters and had
Mm.
in-person meetups in 50 cities. And it's thanks to that constant evolution, we're able to have strong, lasting relationships with our members. I also think, just to answer a couple of the questions like together, Pavilion is only 29 employees. We've got a community of about 10,000 people, and those employees sit across every single facet of our business, including our sponsorships and events business, which is not separate, but like disconnected necessarily from the
Mhm.
full community management. In community management, we've got about 5 or 6 people. My team, which is technology and operations, is 5 or 6 people. It doesn't take huge teams to run this. What
Mhm.
matters is finding a way to understand what people are looking for, whether it's through surveys or whether it's through building really strong relationships with your leading active users. We actually have programs where about 100 of our longest standing, most engaged members can help grow Pavilion through referral programs and get kickbacks for that. They're involved as our chapter heads in different locations. So in London, we've got 2 amazing chapter heads who put on awesome events. We pay them a very small amount for their contribution, but they love Pavilion and want to be part of it. They feel a personal stake in the growth of the London chapter, and they've seen it grow to over 500 members, which is huge for a community, let alone
Yeah.
being one chapter of our global community. So I think figuring out a way to work with your active users, help them build almost like social equity within your company, help them to help you grow, whether it's through referral programs or through them starting to get the power to manage events, is really, really important. And it was probably the biggest reason we ended up signing with Hivebrite versus any of the competitors was the groups feature. We now have something like 100 group admins. We have a lot of group admins, and we let them run wild in their own little group. They plan all of the events in their cities. They send newsletters and updates to their parts of the community. And the bigger you get, the more local you have to act, and the smaller you've got to act. So the bigger we want to grow as a macro community, as this
Mhm.
as Pavilion, the more we've got to get good at building small pockets of our membership that really mean a lot to each other and have the personal connections and the social glue. HQ, as we call ourselves, are never going to have the social glue with 10,000 people. We didn't have it even when we were 100 people. And so what matters is finding a way to constantly bring people in, even if you're not paying them full time, even if they're not employees, inspire them to interact. We all did it when we were at school or university. I used to run so many clubs. I didn't have time to go to classes. And there's still that willingness to be involved. So as you build active members who love what you're doing, figure out a way to kind of distribute some power to them.
Yeah, those natural connectors, like really kind of lean into them within the community. It makes a lot of sense. And you have a lot of big community champions within who really believe in your mission. So I think that's really important. It's not just, um, you know, you, Tom, kind of running the community. You guys have really empowered your members to feel like they're not just a part, but like a part of making Pavilion what it is.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
Yeah.
that point about distributing power, though, goes kind of back to platformization in general and also the ability. So, one of the things we did early on was by trying to bring disparate, like kind of micro communities that already existed together, was we reached out to many of them and said, hey, we have this new tool set essentially. Would you like a group on this platform and the ability to do these things? And you don't have to pay for these yourself. We can help you solve this problem, help you better
Mm,
engage with the community that you already have or that already exists. And we can just give that to you, and the ability to empower them essentially to achieve their mission, but now using what you're providing helps in some cases create those evangelists and those ambassadors and really say, you know, that is the solution that we've been looking for. Also, the longer that we've been around, other people are starting to see that and start coming and asking us for, you know, how did you, you know, and we say, well, you could just use the same things. We can make a group for you. It can be white label branded. You can use this, bring your community into the overall community, and then more things start happening within the network and on your platform. But that goes back to assessing what the needs are and the value that you're providing and what you're doing for them, not what you're trying to get them to do for you, right? So that, I think, speaks to Tom's point about distributing power. But I've seen a couple other questions come through either in the chat or, you know, essentially it's, you know, how do you figure some, just ask. Like, spend a lot of time in your platform and ask people. And when you see something curious, or if you see, you know, people who are, you know, using a module that you've been trying to get people to use, reach out to them and say, hey, what inspired you to ABC, right? Try to build your persona of what that need is, and then leverage that to communicate out, especially if you can get success stories. I now have people writing in and saying, hey, those people that I met through here, we published this article and now we have this thing. I'm like, great. Would you mind also sharing that back to the community, please? Because the more of those success stories, it gives the ideas of how they can use those tools. And it helps, again, activity breeds activity. You know, it is a snowball that rolls down the hill and it picks up steam and it grows in size, but you've got to get those initial seeds going. But, you know, there was still one user that we had invited and it took 2 years until they activated. And when I noticed that, it was one of those, hey, what? Would you mind sharing your journey with me of, did you independently discover the platform I've been trying to invite you to for a while? Or, you know, and it's just trying to say, what was that journey, and understand how people are actually using and interfacing with your overall community. You know, if you don't ask, if you don't reach out, if you don't do some focus grouping, if you don't spend time with those members of the community, you can take a lot of informed guesses, and you should be, and you should be testing your hypotheses, and you should be saying, let's put this out there and see if that works. And if it doesn't, what are we going to do next? And you kind of keep going until something sticks. But also just ask people, hey, why was this sticky for you? How did this work for you? Because they're not going to be unique at this scale. Their experience will be mirrored by others. You're just not hearing about it. And so reaching out, asking, what problem did we solve? Or what inspired you to make that post? Or what, you know, just heck, do it through the platform. Just direct message them and have that conversation. But it also shows them that you care enough to ask. And if you do that respectfully, if you really do just pick their brain and say, great, we're interested with these things, we want that kind of feedback, oftentimes people will then just start writing into you with other ideas, and you can grow from there. It's not saying take everybody's ideas carte blanche and try. Sean's like, no, no, no.
Not every idea is like.
But they all come from some indication of need. And to the same point that Allie's made here, where everybody on this webinar, your needs are different than our needs, but our struggles are going to be similar or parallel, or the ways that we have to approach them will be. The same methodology can lead to a different outcome, but it's knowing how did you figure out that was your right outcome, not modeling the outcome.
It's so interesting that you say that, Jacob. Like, just talk to people. I'm on the marketing side of things. And Tom, I feel like you can relate to this. Everybody wants a spreadsheet. Everybody wants a data analysis. You want to be able to look at things quickly, discern insights. But at the end of the day, the most important information I get about Hivebrite, about our customers, about people who are looking for technology platforms, are when I get on the phone with you guys and learn about exactly what you're doing,
Right.
and how you're using it and what pain points you're experiencing. Like, prepping for this webinar has been more eye-opening than the 12 spreadsheets I've been looking at over the last week. And similarly, some folks on our team who are talking to people who are looking for solutions, a lot of them, the first question they ask is, how did you hear about us? And from a marketing team perspective, when I'm listening to those gong calls, that is more valuable than all of the spreadsheets I'm looking at saying, this person came in via the webinar, or that person came in via the website. Hearing somebody say, oh, I actually went into an AI engine and was looking for, community management platforms. And we showed up there. I was like, that's validating that what we're doing is working and we're showing up in more places. But it feels different too. You get a very different perspective when you hear it from an individual versus when you're looking at a bunch of numbers. So both are important, but it's important not to forget about that, especially in the community aspect of things.
There's a difference between data and meaning, though, and there's a value
Mm-hmm.
to the ontological experience and to that lived experience of solving those problems. And that's why these webinars and the Hivebrite community itself, I've started to get more active there too, because it's, well, practicing what we preach. But, everybody on this call should be asking questions there too, because then everybody there can help answer your questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it does yield those dividends, but there's also a survivorship bias in some of this. When you're only getting the feedback from the people that it's been successful for, when you say, hey, how did you hear about
Yeah.
us? Well, all the places then that it's working. And that's great if you can double down on those. But it doesn't say there isn't some untapped area that you're still missing this potential user base, this potential member base, and you just haven't heard about it yet. And I think always staying open-minded to the fact that, there is this other segment, or have we mapped out the total addressable market for this? And what needs aren't we fitting yet? Because it's too easy to get stuck in the this is what we do and this is who we are paradigm. But ultimately, if it's bigger than that, you say, well, we're trying to connect all of these communities. So what would that actually look like? Not which ones have we been successful with, but what are the actual pain points that people are experiencing? Why aren't some people finding us? Why aren't some people joining us? And then what is the value to those individuals? And maybe we've got some more work to do on being valuable, not just in communicating it and not just reaching them.
Yeah. No, that's a very true. Can't be blind to the gaps that you have and why people are getting kind of like lost in the shuffle there for sure.
And it's so easy to do, especially when you're
Yeah.
looking at the spreadsheets of, what has returned on investment. It doesn't say you shouldn't be prospecting over here or trying some new solution over there. And then sometimes you just find it's miscalibrated, or, you've been calling it the wrong thing. I forget, Tom,
Oh
what you
yeah,
called your
language.
ambassadors program, but it's one of those, we have it. No
Yeah.
one knows that we do because we named it something that is amorphous and confusing. You know, it there's that constant struggle of, even if it's in the top line nav, do
Yeah.
people click on it? Is it the right named thing? Is it discoverable? Is it usable when they do discover it? And even then, if you move things, do you remind them that it still exists? Do you tell them where it went? There, I can go on this rant for a long time, so I'll just stop there.
Something
No.
Something we do is so we do an annual member survey, and then we also get NPS scores. We do an NPS survey 3 months after someone becomes a member and 6 months every thereafter. And I try to do it every quarter, but sometimes it's not as frequent. I'll analyze all the words people are using. And if there's something that comes up, like job board used to come up, it doesn't anymore because we've got one now. I will then go and say to our SVP of member experience, hey, I think people want a job board, but can you go speak to a few people?
Mhm.
So, what really helps us is we can balance me. I swim in data. I'm at home in data. I love data. Um, and her, who has relationships with so many of our members, and we can actually get the quant and the qualitative data. So, when we're looking at features, when we're thinking about like areas of Pavilion that might need a little more customization or like a little upgrade here and there. It's nice to be able to have the data, makes everyone feel comfortable. We're data driven, but then also go and confirm that with people who are using it every day.
Right.
Mhm.
We thought for a while that people weren't posting their newsletters as like news articles in Hivebrite because it was difficult. We went and spoke to them, and it wasn't because it was difficult. It was just because they couldn't find our brand font in there. And so we then made a different suggestion of a font to use, and they all started
Brilliant.
doing it. So if we'd never spoken to people, I would have been like, how do I customize this rich text editor, which would be a nightmare. Instead, we just made a slight edit to our enablement materials, and suddenly everyone's using it. So speaking to people about whether it's the features you want to roll out, new things to do, how to get people to engage, any of this is super, super important.
I always approach needs assessment. What's your gaps? What are your barriers? What are your resources? What are your methods that you will use to achieve improvement, right? And if you don't know what the gap is, if you don't know what that barrier is, so you know people aren't posting enough, but intuitively you don't go to can't find font. You know, you've got to talk to the people who are actually having that issue. One of our weird ones, I'll talk about just the naming nomenclature. What do you call the members of your platform? Users, members, people? We had called ours people in the first iteration, and because we have a bunch of researchers and many of them are clinical researchers, they thought people meant study participants, not fellow researchers, and they weren't clicking on that at all. You said, you know, like, no, we're getting feedback. Like, we'd love to be able to network with and find others. We're like, we've got 4,000 of you. What do you mean? And they're like, oh, I didn't think that was
Click.
people like me. I thought that was other people. I'm like,
We
we
don't
didn't
talk to
anticipate.
people.
They didn't identify
Right.
as people.
We're like, you're people too, but let's set that aside. And it's just figuring out how your community responds to those things, or what are the barriers
Yeah.
that are keeping them from using the solutions that you're putting in place. And sometimes it's left field from what you would have guessed.
Ooh, totally. No, that's a very funny anecdote. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, we on the marketing side of things, when we're writing copy a lot, we always you kind of get stuck in your own world of your own nomenclature, and then you kind of go, well, how are people trying to find us searching for community management platforms? What are they? And it does take a kind of few minutes to really put yourself in other folks' shoes. um we still have a bunch of questions where I'm looking at the time, and we're almost out of time here. I want to ensure everybody who's posted questions will be kind of reaching out. This is really, really helpful to see what people are interested in learning about. I hope you guys have all had a great time on this webinar, but definitely feel free to get in touch with myself, Jacob, Tom, if you guys have any other questions. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar by email, so just take a look within the next day or two. You should get an email with the recording. And one of my colleagues is going to post a survey link in the chat. So if you enjoyed the webinar, if there were any pieces of feedback, please feel free to take the survey. We'd love to keep providing really helpful community resources to you guys. And Tom and Jacob, thank you guys so much. This was such a joy, just hearing your perspectives, kind of different community approaches, how we're all the same, and really kind of understanding the steps it took you guys to really build the ideal communities for you using a variety of different tools and methodologies.
Ellie, thank you so much for inviting me. Tom, thank you for just hanging out on some of these pre-calls too. It's been
It's
awesome
been
getting
so
to know you.
good. Yeah, it's been so much fun. Thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
Ellie.
Everybody have a great rest of your Monday.
I guess.